At 14, my parents locked me in my room for a week, called me a freak, then dumped me on Grandma's porch and drove away. Years later, they returned, polite, empty, asking for my inheritance to save their perfect son. I didn't rage. I set one rule. Their masks slipped. I was 14 when they left me at my grandmother's. They said it would be easier for everyone. Later, when they thought I couldn't hear, they called me a freak because of the seizures, because I reacted at the wrong times in the wrong ways, because I was never the version of daughter they'd ordered from the catalog. Years passed in a long, quiet stretch. Then one day they reappeared, very polite, very practical, asking me to return part of Grandma's inheritance so they could help my brother out of a mess. Funny how help and honesty only seemed to exist when the problem wasn't me. My first seizures came early. Epilepsy landed in my pediatric chart like a rubber stamp on the cover. My parents weren't ready. Emotionally, psychologically, pick a word. They looked at me the way you look at a malfunctioning appliance. Scary to touch, embarrassing to show guests. I learned young that the rules for me were different from the rules for my brother. Colton is 3 years older. With him, everything was simple, well-behaved, straight report cards, no surprises. I was not simple. Some days my body turned into an electrical storm and my brain into a room where someone cut the lights. That was only the first tile in the mosaic. At 8, they added dyslexia to the list. The words ran on the page, smearing like somebody had spilled water on the alphabet. Later came ADHD, the heavy kind. Imagine a child with too much current and too much break at the same time. With a child like that, you don't scold, you learn. Slow explanations, adjusted routines, steady support. My parents chose distance and annoyance instead. It's too much of a burden, they told friends in that practical tone people use for weather and car trouble. But children were their choice, and being ready for the unexpected was part of that choice. It's like they decided that because the first kid arrived without surprises, the second one would too. When I was already here, there was no choice left, only relationship. And they worked very hard to teach me I was a mistake to be tolerated. It's hard to call my childhood fun or normal, not only because of diagnoses, mostly because of how those diagnoses were met at home. Most of my early problems weren't medical, they were the empty spaces I ran into. I would walk into a room and conversations would go flat. Before I turned 10, I could already hear the hush, half tone, half flinch. It got worse as I got older. My mind was thin glass. The constant sense that people were embarrassed by me was too much. By middle school and into 14, I started to split at the seams, arguing, shouting, slamming doors. Hormones helped, sure, but the main ingredient was the house where I had never once been wanted. It isn't the illness that breaks a heart. It's being left alone inside it. I stopped trying at school. I tanked classes on purpose, like I was signing my name under their decision to write me off. I got stubborn, sharp, mean, pushed away everyone, even the few friends who kept trying to stay. I knew I was acting stupid, but misery leaves you short on options. This was how I made myself visible. Whenever the school called about my behavior, my parents would show up tired, look over my shoulder, and sigh as if the real question was how soon they could leave. At home, I made scenes, not because I love drama, but because any ordinary sentence shattered against their concrete indifference. "Act normal," they'd say, rolling their eyes, and switch the subject. That was the maximum attention available. It hurt more than yelling. At 14, I crossed a line. I brought a vape to school and took a drag in the middle of English class. The teacher told me to shut it off and step into the hallway. I gave him the finger, childish and stupid at the same time. Up to that day, people found ways to excuse my stunts. My parents would assure everyone I was not all there and needed special patience. After that scene, there was no rewinding. I got expelled. That was the single moment my parents truly got angry. At home, they crushed me with sentences that still tighten my throat. Nothing I didn't already know, but hearing it out loud is different. They said they regretted ever deciding to have me, that if they'd known in advance I would be this crazy, this defective, they would have ended the pregnancy, that I was a burden and life had been so much better back when they had only one son. They promised to do whatever it takes to get rid of me, to never let me ruin their lives again. They punished me for a week by locking me in my room. Not a metaphor, a real latch on the outside. Bathroom by permission. Meals on a tray. No talking. I lay on the bed and felt like an inmate in solitary. Worse, actually. Prison guards weren't supposed to be your parents. I hadn't committed a crime. I was a teenager begging for attention in the clumsiest ways. They were supposed to be the adults, and they weren't. Yes, I was hard to handle. Illnesses aren't dollhouses. Adulthood is measured precisely where it hurts. They wanted children by the manual. They got me, a living, complicated person, and decided the flaw was in me, not in their gaze. After a week of isolation, I learned what "you are no longer part of this family" sounds like. In the morning, my mother said, "Pack your things." I put a hoodie, notebooks, a charger, my meds, and a seizure action card into a backpack. Mom and my brother filled boxes. I sat in the car and tried not to think. An hour later, we were on the road. The streets were familiar. After a few turns, I knew where we were headed. My grandmother's house. My father's mother. I told myself it was for a couple of weeks. Maybe the adults wanted to let everyone cool off. Grandma was strict, but she'd always been honest and kind with me. It didn't feel like punishment. Until the porch. They unloaded my things, left them by the door, and said, "Bring it in. This is your home now." They added that they didn't want any further contact, especially after what you did. They said I'd tried to ruin their reputation, that I had crossed a line, and there's no going back. I stood in the doorway and begged them not to do this. For all my talk about being independent, 14 is still a child who wants a place in their own family. Being left felt like finding out you're the extra box on the curb. I was also scared for Grandma. She was in her 60s, a widow, not rich. I knew she loved me, but I didn't know if she wanted me or if she could manage me. I felt like I was changing from a burden on my parents into a burden on her. I didn't want to disappoint her. When I stayed with her before and she heard about my disasters, she got angry, yes, but she always backed me up. "You're strong. You'll figure it out." She kept telling me my parents would come around if I learned to hold myself together. That was another reason the move scared me. What if she got tired too and started to hate me? I couldn't afford to lose her. Everything was tangled. I asked my parents to reconsider. They said the decision was made. Right in front of me, they calmly told my grandmother, "We're done." Then they added they didn't want a freak like her in their house anymore and needed to focus on our perfectly normal son. I'd heard words like that from school bullies and had learned to let them slide off. Hearing them from my parents was a knife to the back, followed by an apology for getting blood on the rug. It was the day I understood the biggest bullies in my life didn't live at school. Ugly truth? They did me a favor by sending me to Grandma's. Nothing I did would have earned me their love, not even becoming perfect. So I stopped begging. I accepted that I lived with Grandma now, and I decided to get better, for myself and for her. When the car pulled away and the house settled, we sat at the kitchen table. That talk was overdue for both of us. She was honest. She loved me, but she hadn't been ready. She'd hesitated. She'd heard from my father what a problem I was, and at her age she wasn't sure she could manage me without breaking both of us. She didn't know if she could build a life where I could grow instead of implode. That's why she needed a week to say yes. Then she told me my father had let something slip. I punished her, locked her in the room for a week. That was her final straw. Your father isn't the adult you need, she said, and apologized for not stepping in sooner. She had her reasons: widow, limited means, health. But once she knew the details, she also knew why I acted the way I did. She decided to give me a real chance to do things right. Not like my parents, through shame and punishment, but the adult way: support, boundaries, respect. Treat this as an opportunity, Grandma said. I'll try to be the adult who stays. You try to be the teenager who moves forward. I apologized for the chaos I'd caused. I told her I forgave her for not taking me earlier, even though she knew how I was being treated. We agreed to leave the past behind and to work on the future. I'm still grateful for that evening, for the plain words that held more love than all my parents' careful, "We did our best." After that day, I turned my life over. Not at once, inch by inch, habit by habit. Grandma helped. She found tutors in reading and math so I could catch up. She met with the school to make sure I wasn't equalized, but actually accommodated. And later, when it was obvious my old school was chewing me up, she filed the papers and got me into a private program with support. Teachers who knew my diagnoses ahead of time and didn't treat me like a normal kid who just needed a hallway scolding. The difference was enormous. No one used my conditions as an excuse. No one pretended they didn't exist. With that foundation, the once impossible happened. I finished high school with good grades and got into college. Like any other teenager with a plan, I learned to set targets and move toward them. For that, I thank my grandmother. Only her. My parents would drop by Grandma's once in a while. They never saw me. Every time they came, I slipped out and didn't return till they were gone. They didn't seem to mind. I didn't either. It went on like that for a couple of years, until the day Grandma snapped. They showed up with the same old lines: my awful temperament, the shame I brought the family, and the same refusal to admit where they'd stopped being parents. They called me a rotten apple, a freak. For the first time in a long time, Grandma raised her voice. She told them not to come back, and they listened. In this one way, they were consistent. Their pride never let them admit the obvious. We haven't spoken in almost 10 years. It turned out to be easier than I expected. We lived as if those people who once called themselves my family simply didn't exist, not out of spite, because otherwise the quiet turned back into noise. In those years, I crossed a lot of markers. Finished high school, got into college and stayed, rented my own place, found work, learned how to pay bills on time and how to fry eggs so the whites stay in a circle, not a cloud. Grandma's trick. Through all of it, I didn't speak to my parents once. They didn't try either. My accounts were open. I never blocked them. Any hay would have arrived just fine. They chose silence, like picking wallpaper you don't have to notice, something that won't remind you a home was ever lived in. Sometimes I almost messaged first. Then I'd hear the click of that latch from the week they locked me in, feel the air go thicker than water in my chest, and the urge would pass. They reached out only after she died. For months after the funeral, I walked like my legs were cotton. She was the adult who stood on my side even when I convinced myself there was no side. We hadn't lived together the last few years. I'd moved to study, then to be closer to work. But she was still my brace. One phone call. "I'm listening." That was enough to pull the scattered pieces back into a person. Without her, the kitchen sounded different. The ticking clock became breathing. The funeral was quiet. I chose the flowers myself, her porch roses and plain white lilies. People didn't say much at the gathering after. Later, the lawyer read the will. The house to me. The savings, too. Not riches for the ages, but enough that rent and the dentist didn't feel like cliffs. Tucked into the documents was a note in her hand. Zoya, take care of yourself, make plans, don't live by punishments. I slid the note into her old recipe notebook, the page with lemon pie, where she'd scribbled in red, "Skip the sugar. You're already sweet." Not 6 months passed before the knock came. There they were on my porch. Polite faces, polished condolences, my mother gripping a folder, my father the door frame. I let them talk, just in case they were here to apologize. A couple of sentences later, we arrived at the real point. Their perfectly normal, healthy son was not, in fact, fine. In college, he experimented, then lost control. Now it was hitting his classes, his job, his everything. He needed help. Paid rehab. Inpatient. No more low-cost programs. The words stuck in their mouths, but the meaning was perfectly clear. They needed money. Mine. I asked why he couldn't start with the cheaper options, groups, outpatient, anything within reach. We tried, they said. Not enough. He needed a clinic farther away, longer, with real specialists. It would be expensive. They said the word like a spell that opens wallets. They didn't name a figure, but I could see it gathering on my father's lips, rehearsed. I'm not a rehab expert, and I wasn't going to become one overnight. I knew other things. I have a job, a paycheck, savings. Grandma had a house and careful investments layered since Grandpa's time. Lucky for me. Less lucky for them. For years they were too proud to keep a relationship. Too proud to say sorry, even as the numbers would have helped. And now, suddenly, we're family. Help us. I said I would. Any reasonable amount. One condition. They had to acknowledge publicly what they did to me. Not whispered over a sink, not texted, not hidden between lines, publicly, a letter to the family, a post in our group chat, an email round to the cousins, whichever. Own the words they used on me. Own how they treated my grandmother. Own that they need my help now, and explain why. We kept the peace for a decade because Grandma hated drama. But when people come asking for money after all that, honesty stops being a luxury. It's paying the bill. I didn't feel guilty about the condition. I wanted the truth in the room so it would stop gnawing at me. It wasn't blackmail. It was shelving the story where it belongs, so it can't keep rewriting itself. The condition was simple as a switch. This side is light, that side is dark. Choose. Their faces lengthened. They tried to bargain. Called me unfair. Called me selfish. I repeated myself. It's my condition. Take it or leave it. I wasn't hoarding money. I had no grudge against my brother and barely any anger left for them, but I needed honesty. Without it, money isn't help. It's a continuation of the old lie through a different account. They changed tactics. How could you? He's in trouble. I asked where they'd been when I was in trouble. Silence. My mother said, "We didn't know what to do." I said, "You can always start by not locking a child in a room." They left. Long sighs, accusations, hints that these things shouldn't be made public. A few days later, the messages started. First words, then photos of my brother, bad light, hollow cheeks, empty eyes. Here is the person who needs your help. I looked and felt pain. Pain, yes. Guilt, no. Alongside the ache rose that old buried thought. Where were you when I needed help? If they wanted mine now, they'd have to put down their pride. Not for me. For him. I answered once. The condition stands. A public admission. No ifs, no buts. I didn't argue after that. Clear rules are easy. They only feel hard to people who have never had to be wrong. 10 days later, they came back, with my brother. They stood at my doorway like an exhibit. He stared at his shoes. His fingers worried a seam on his hoodie sleeve, and I saw myself at 14, twisting a lamp cord while people told me to act normal. The humiliation belonged to him first. "Zoya," he said, very quiet. This isn't your scene," I said, equally quiet. "Come by yourself, and we'll talk." My parents got loud. "We're together." "We are a family." I said I'd speak to him when he wanted to come on his own. No audience. They pushed. Wanted a yes on the spot. I said if they didn't leave, I'd call the police and start the paperwork for a restraining order. That cooled them. As they walked away, my father tossed, "You and your grandma are the most selfish people on the planet." Funny word, coming from someone who once left me on a porch because they didn't want the work of a child who needed help. Funnier still how quickly they forget. The perfect child they loved. The real one they couldn't. After that, I finally did what I should have done sooner. Blocked their numbers. Moved to another neighborhood. Told the relatives, the address is for no one. Last time somebody decided parents deserve to know where their daughter lives and handed it over. Now there would be no more deserves. "If you share it, I cut contact," I said. One cousin hesitated. He chose me. I made a list of what I intended to keep. First, quiet. Second, memory. Third, what Grandma actually taught. Not money, a way to live. Mondays are budget check. Wednesdays are long walks without headphones. Weekends are for the roses by the steps. I keep her house together, fix the stairs, replace the porch screen, and write expenses in her paper planner where neat lines share a page with underlined reminders like, "Call Zoya." Sometimes a pressed petal falls from between the pages, a small proof that beauty can be archived too. The messages kept coming. The tone kept shifting. Accusations, then requests, then threats to expose the truth, then requests again. Somewhere in the middle of that, I noticed the old tremor was gone. Inside felt level, like water in a cup held with both hands. I learned to set boundaries and not explain them forever. Boundaries aren't walls. They're maps. This is open. This is closed. This entrance requires respect. I think about my brother a lot. In the evenings, sitting on the steps, listening to the trees move. I picture him coming alone one day. No parents. No directors. I put on the kettle. We sit. He says, "I'm sorry." I say, "You too." We look up a program that actually fits. I pay for it, not to repay the past, but to invest in his present. That's a different story. I'll be ready when he is. A week after their first visit, I wrote the rule one more time. No public admission, no money. I knew the will left everything to me. The lawyer had mailed the letters, so they knew it too. They would have to sit with their choices. I wasn't holding the line to win. I was holding it so I could stop lying to myself that it wasn't that bad. It was. Name it. That same night, I didn't sleep. Not from fear, memory. The house still held the echo of my 14-year-old lockdown, the snap of the latch, the tray on the floor, the hush in the hallway. I made tea and wrote myself a letter, the admission I keep waiting to hear from them. "Zoya, what they did was wrong. You were a child. They locked you in and used words you don't say to children. It wasn't your fault I read it out loud and filed it with the important papers. Sometimes growing up is saying the true thing to yourself in the voice you didn't have." A month later, I opened a separate account. The Evelyn Fund, small but steady. From it, I pay for tutors and camps and audiobooks for kids who get stamped with diagnoses like barcodes. Modest grants. No social posts. Just a hang-in-there note and a first receipt paid. Sometimes that's enough to stop someone's world from tilting. The first transfer went to a girl in the next city, Mia, whose letters run away from her the way mine used to, while her teacher calls it laziness. I read her thank you 3 times and cried 3.5. Work ticks along. Mornings I jog the block. Evenings I read out loud, slowly, the way my reading specialist taught me back then. The words don't sprint anymore. They walk. I'm learning to like their pace. Once a week I write lists, errands, groceries, what to talk about with myself. Strange items appear. Buy lemons. Check the smoke alarm batteries. Tell yourself it's working. I buy, I check, I tell. It's therapy, but homemade. Sometimes I dream about my parents' house. I walk in and no one is there. The walls hold photos where I'm missing too. I hear my own footsteps and know how not to be scared of the silence. A small victory, but mine. In one dream, I opened the fridge and there was Grandma's lemon pie. No sugar. Yours sweet enough. I woke up tasting citrus and relief. If my brother ever calls on his own, I'll answer. No conditions. I'm here, I'll say. The rest we can do like grown-ups, with the honesty I wasn't given. Maybe we'll repair one thread in this cracked family pattern. If not, I'll still know I did what I could. I wonder sometimes why admitting the obvious is impossible for some people. Then I look at the note above my desk. Pride is a suit tailored to someone else's measurements and worn to rags. I'm done with costumes. I want clothes that fit. Honesty, quiet, and the people who stay by choice, not paperwork. I close this and go water the roses by the steps. They're still steady and straight, not because someone told them to be, because they have a trellis and light. That's what Grandma taught me. Support and light. The rest grows. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment with your thoughts. See you in the next video.